President Trump just wrapping up a press conference in Singapore following that historic summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. With me now to break it all down, Fox Business Network's Dagan McDowell, CFRA investment strategist Lindsay Bell, and The Coming Collapse of China author Gordon Chang. Good to see everybody. Good morning on this historic morning this morning. Gordon Chang, your reaction.
Well, this certainly represents progress. We're much farther down the road than I thought, for instance, 48 hours ago. I think most people were surprised how far we've gotten. But also, we're not as far as we should have been after a first summit with Kim Jong-un, because that summit gave legitimization to Kim, solidified his rule at home. It was really one of the main reasons why he wanted to meet President Trump. So we could have probably gotten more. But the important thing here, when you look at it in broader perspective, is essentially this starts a long process. I'm sure the U.S. is going to apply a lot of pressure to get this done. So I'm optimistic that we'll actually get to a point where the North Koreans won't have ballistic missiles, won't have nukes. We will get that accounting for Japanese abductees. We will have verification.
One of the things that struck you that we discussed during the commercial break was during the press conference was the idea of missile testing between the U.S. and South Korea. Let's talk about that for a moment, because that worried you.
Well, certainly. And the other thing that worries me is the stopping of the military exercises, because we do those to maintain readiness. We don't have readiness. It's very difficult for us to resist an invasion from North Korea. Even if North Korea didn't have nukes today, they'd still have their chemical and biological agents, Maria, and they'd have their high explosives, 14,300 artillery tubes right north of the demilitarized zone. So this is a point where the United States needs to be able to defend South Korea, and without those exercises, it makes it really, really difficult.
So what happens then? I mean, the U.S. has agreed to stop the military testing for a time?
Well, what President Trump said, and this really was a bombshell, because I don't think people expected this, was that during the pendency of the negotiations on the nuclear deal, that we would not be having exercises with South Korea, the joint drills. So there needs to be a little bit more detail there from the president, but that's what he said, and I'm sure that that's going to be questioned, because that is a major concession to North Korea.
The document that was issued, that was signed by both Kim and President Trump, it lacked a lot of detail in terms of how to make the denuclearization process quick, verifiable, and irreversible. But President Trump was asked about that, and he said, we're going to have inspectors in North Korea. And when pressed, he said they're going to be a combination of Americans and international individuals. So I thought that that was telling. It seems like, and Gordon, am I going out on a limb saying that there are details that have been worked out that are written in pencil at this point that aren't in the document that was signed?
Yeah, Dagan, I think you're absolutely right. And there are a lot of things that President Trump probably didn't talk about, because apparently at the end of this, there were a lot of things that it added and were not actually put into the joint statement. And one of the things, Dagan, that I found really striking, of course, there is this last provision about the return of remains of U.S. soldiers. And this, a lot of people criticize the president for all sorts of things, but he really does have a heart. Because this is not a major issue going into this, but this is an issue for many American families. And people talked to him, I guess, during the campaign, as he mentioned. So I was really touched by that. And also his reference to Otto Warmbier not dying in vain. I just felt that that was so important for an American president to say. And we wouldn't have heard that from some of his predecessors. So I think the president should be. I really was very proud to be an American when I heard that.
And what about China? How do they play into all this? Because, they haven't been really living up to their sanctions in the last several months. Trade is an important topic for Trump with regards to China. North Korea is their #1 trade partner. So how does China view this summit, and where do they go from here?
Yeah, that's a critical question. I think President Trump was a little bit too generous to Xi Jinping, because over the last 3 months, we have seen blatant sanctions violations by China. Their behavior is markedly deteriorated, and we've also seen marked deterioration in Russian enforcement as well. And this is something that I think President Trump is going to have to confront, because if, for instance, Kim Jong-un drags his feet on this, which is like a 99.99% probability, then we're going to have to impose costs on the Chinese, because I think Beijing actually gave a message to Kim Jong-un during their meeting at the beginning of last month in Dalian, and basically saying, look, we will take care of you. You don't need relief from the U.S. because we'll give you that sanctions relief. And really, that's bad behavior. It's a malign influence. We got to do something about it.
What are your thoughts about the idea of legitimizing Kim Jong-un just by the handshake? I mean, this seems to be some of the criticism out there. Let's not forget President Obama just 2 years ago went and shook the hand of in Cuba of Raul Castro. So, and then they did the wave at the game. But
while there was a terror attack on one of our allies in Europe, remember it was the same day he sat at that baseball game,
exactly,
and doing the wave as one of our allies was being attacked by terrorists.
So we want to remind people of that. But your thoughts on what people are saying this morning in terms of legitimizing Kim Jong-un?
You know, that's an important point, because up to now, it was only the North Koreans making concessions, releasing the 3 Americans last month, making denuclearization pledges. And then all of a sudden, we make a big concession, which is this meeting. And that's a loss of leverage for us. So to make that loss of leverage acceptable, we should have gotten something more in return. Now, I think that that's certainly not an irreversible loss on our part, because essentially we can put pressure on North Korea and China and Russia. But right now, President Trump is working uphill. He didn't need to have to do that.
He did mention really quickly the destruction by North Korea agreeing to destroy this engine, the missile engine testing site, which he brought up at least twice during that press conference.
And that's important. But nonetheless, you know, that was in the works about 10 days ago. So that's not entirely new. It's good progress, though, and we should welcome any sign of progress in this connection.